A man remained alone in a quiet hospital room as the night enveloped the world outside. Gazing at his eldest son who lay motionless in the bed, he could not hide the sorrow that welled up in his eyes. He arrived to gaze upon him one final time, saying goodbye by softly placing his hand on him. His thoughts drifted to the 15 years he had spent married, a time he had always believed was happy and stable. He was convinced that his life could not get any worse. He remained unaware that his downward journey was still ahead of him, with destiny preparing an even greater plunge into darkness. His misfortune deepened as his son's overwhelming hospital expenses piled up, reaching a staggering 20 million won each month. In addition, he had to pay a settlement because he caused a car accident when he tried to swerve away from an intoxicated woman. He also struggled with feelings of disappointment in his career, as his attempts to get his novels published kept ending in rejection. The weight pressing down on the couple grew too much for either of them to endure, even with her unwavering patience and strength. Together, they quickly spiraled into a deep and overwhelming darkness. Weariness slowly eroded their spirits, leaving them longing intensely for a moment of tranquility. Desperation for salvation drove the man and his wife to sit together at a table, where 2 chilled beverages rested before them. Uncertainty clouded the man's expression as he paused, nervously wondering aloud if he ought to take the first sip. His wife met his eyes with determination, assuring him she would join him shortly and gently reminding him not to go back on his word. He expresses his worries to her, wanting to know what will happen to their daughter. She gently comforts him, promising that he doesn't need to be concerned, as she intends to look after her with great care. The man extended his hands toward the glass, pausing with uncertainty as he questioned whether this act would truly bring an end to their sorrow. That day, the family made the tragic choice to bring their lives to an end. With shaky hands, the man lifts the glass to his lips and slowly starts to drink. The wife gazed at her husband with anticipation, her eyes fixed on him as she silently awaited the moment he would lift the poisoned glass to his lips. At the very last second, the husband shouted and pulled the glass away before taking a sip. He admitted he couldn't follow through with the decision and expressed his regret. His wife became furious, demanding an explanation for his sudden change of mind. He then attempts to make him drink from the glass against his will. He shouted insistently, convinced that he had no choice but to go through with it. The man desperately pleads for mercy, tears streaming down his face as he struggles against her, imploring her to end her actions. The tension between the two escalated, reaching a breaking point when he let out a loud, desperate shout for her to stop. In one swift, forceful motion, he knocked her hand aside, causing the glass to break and its contents to spill everywhere. The two fell to the ground among the shattered glass, as their daughter slept soundly in the next room, completely oblivious to the disaster about to happen. His wife, overwhelmed by hopelessness, wonders aloud what they should do next, especially after all the effort and struggle it took for them to reach this point in their decision. As tears streamed down his face, he sorrowfully begged for forgiveness, repeatedly declaring that the task was beyond him. She raised her voice at him, demanding to know if he still hadn't understood that continuing their current way of life would only lead to greater pain and unhappiness for them both. The husband watched as his wife broke down, tears streaming down her face, and gently spoke her name, Young, in a comforting tone. He assured her that he would work to make their lives better and pleaded with her to let them have another opportunity to start over. On that day, their attempt to meet death once more ended in failure. During a subsequent scene, rain poured down in the darkness of night. As the man drives his taxi, he informs someone waiting for a ride that his shift has already ended. He is caught off guard when an old man with an odd appearance suddenly enters the car, his face stretched into a broad, unsettling grin. The elderly gentleman firmly repeated his demand, commanding the driver to begin at once, prompting the driver to depart amid an air of suspense. While they traveled by car, the man glanced at the elderly passenger through the mirror, his expression betraying his uneasy suspicion and nervousness. The elderly man looked at him, remarking that, in his view, money had brought about the downfall of everything. The man wanted to know how the other person intended his statement. The elderly man went on to explain that life, by its very nature, is filled with hardship, and he urged the boy not to let financial troubles drive him to consider ending his own life once more. The unexpected event caught the driver off guard, causing them to bring the car to an abrupt halt. The character suddenly became furious, demanding to know the stranger's identity and questioning what gave him the authority to meddle in the affairs of others. The elderly man chooses not to react to the other's anger, and instead straightforwardly inquires whether the younger man requires financial assistance. He notices the driver remains silent, so he persistently asks his question again. The driver paused briefly before confessing that he was short on cash. The elderly man instructs him to reverse the car's direction. With a cold, unsettling grin, the figure revealed that their route was shifting toward a location destined to alter his life forever. They reach a rundown structure standing alone in an abandoned place. As they made their way inside, the elderly man muttered about the ache in his knees from having to climb the stairs. Uncertainty slowly settles in the driver's mind, as he realizes that trusting this unfamiliar person might have been a poor decision from the start. He questioned what he might find of value in a place such as this. Before he has a chance to finish thinking, the elderly man interrupts to announce that they have reached their destination. The group stops in front of a grand, elaborately decorated door, upon which the words Apollo Savings Bank are displayed. The elderly man informed the driver that the funds required would be handled by Apollo Savings Bank. The driver, with a note of reluctance in his voice, explains to the elderly man that he has been blacklisted, making it impossible for him to obtain a loan. The elderly man responds by explaining that it makes no difference, since this bank is unlike any other. The moment he pushes the door open, the driver steps into a hallway, its walls flanked by multiple doors. The elderly man informs the young visitor that a window has been made available for his use, and offers a wish for his success. Without warning, she vanished, leaving the driver by himself, confused and unsure of what had just happened. The man, feeling unsure and nervous, slowly reaches out and pushes open one of the doors before him. He soon discovered that he was standing in a neat, compact office, where a bank worker sat at a desk and greeted him to Apollo Savings Bank. Sang, the employee, approached and inquired about his needs. The man, his voice trembling with uncertainty, admits that he is seeking a loan. As part of the usual process, the staff member requests to see his identification. The worker carefully typed his information into the computer. The man reflects inwardly, noticing how strikingly authentic and ordinary his surroundings appear, and he questions whether such a bank could truly exist in reality. After a brief wait, the employee addressed Park Ho by his complete name and shared the news that he qualified for a loan amounting to 950 million won. Park's eyes grew wide with surprise. He turned to the employee, wanting to confirm if he had understood the number right. The employee maintained a calm demeanor as she the total and inquired whether he intended to take out the entire sum. Park, his voice uncertain, wonders aloud whether he must take out the full amount. The employee informs him that he has the option to take out either the entire sum or just part of it. Fueled by urgency and necessity, Park eagerly declared his desire to claim the full sum. Doubt crept back into his mind, prompting him to wonder about collateral, though he realized he had nothing to give. The employee offered a warm smile and explained that there was no need for any collateral. The worker passed the loan documents across the desk, waiting for him to sign them. Park senses that the situation is odd and feels a nagging sense that something isn't right. Despite his unease, the promise of wealth and the chance to fix all his troubles prove too tempting, and his desire outweighs his doubts. The employee inquires whether he would like to continue. Park nodded in agreement and proceeded to sign the documents. Once he finished signing, he turned to the employee and wondered aloud about the reason he was approved for this loan, given that his bad credit usually kept him from borrowing money elsewhere. The employee looked startled by the man's inquiry, wondering aloud if he had arrived at the bank without understanding how its system worked. Park nods in agreement, confirming the statement. The staff member lets him know that he doesn't have much money in his account, and noticing his confusion, offers to explain how the bank system works. The employee started to clarify that Apollo Bank monitors its customers' projected balances each year. Then, delivering surprising news, the employee revealed that Park Ho was set to receive a deposit of $1 billion into his account before the year ended. Park's eyes widened with astonishment as he struggled to comprehend how such an event could possibly occur. The worker nods in agreement, indicating that what he said is true. Park wondered aloud, curious about how the other person could predict what was to come. He explains that he is unable to share the information, citing the bank's rules as the reason. He goes on to clarify that the bank permits customers to take out loans against their future funds, charging a 5% interest fee paid in advance. The employee went on to clarify for Park that he had, in effect, taken an advance on the money he would make later, allowing him to access those funds now when they were most needed. Park took a moment to absorb the astonishing thought, quietly voicing his belief that a sum of $1 billion would come to him within the year. His thoughts raced as he tried to figure out where this unexpected fortune had come from, considering whether his novel might have taken first place in a contest, or if an international company such as had offered him a lucrative contract. He quickly pushes those thoughts aside, reasoning that where the money came from isn't important at the moment. With the money he now had, he could at last cover his son Soman's hospital expenses, afford the upcoming treatments, and catch up on the rent and other living costs that had been piling up. He believed that owning even a modest apartment would allow him to leave all his suffering behind. Once he has the bank card in hand, he wastes no time and makes his way straight to the closest ATM. His heart thudded rapidly in his chest. His pulse grew sluggish as he faced the ATM, watching a message pop up that read the balance was being checked after the transaction. The ATM screen revealed to him that his account held almost 950 million won. A broad, astonished grin slowly appears on his face. Park would later describe the dramatic shift in his life that occurred once he received the money. When his wife inquired where the money had come from, he explained that it was from Apollo Savings Bank, and after hearing this, she chose not to question him any further. The arrival of this money felt like an extraordinary blessing to his family. Because of this, Soman's operation went well, and his son made it through the procedure successfully. A boy who had once been warned that his days were numbered now discovered a fresh chance to live. The family settled into a comfortable new apartment. His wife expressed her astonishment, struggling to comprehend that such an event had truly occurred. Park managed to clear every debt he owed, both personal and to the bank, allowing him to at last leave behind the negative reputation that came with poor credit. Although happiness filled the air, his wife looked at him with concern, questioning whether the money could truly be trusted. He comforted her, explaining that the money was legitimate and promising that all would be explained before the year was over. He assured her that her pain had finally come to an end. Despite everything that had occurred, the wife found herself growing increasingly uneasy. As their circumstances got better, they purchased a car for the family. They also picked out a backpack for their younger child. By the middle of September, an unusual feeling of discomfort slowly started to settle in. The funds the bank had assured would arrive within the year still hadn't materialized. He attempted to comfort himself by imagining that it could arrive the next day, several months later, or perhaps not until the very end of the year. At the same time, he learned that had turned down his synopsis, leaving him with just a small payment from a short story he had sold, while his wife remained the sole steady earner in their household. Park put down his pen, overcome with hopelessness as he tried to figure out how he could possibly gather 1 billion won before the year was over. At first, Park's days had been filled with hope, but as the weeks passed, an unfamiliar anxiety slowly took hold of him. Several days passed. While he looked through his mailbox, he discovered a letter that sent a wave of fear and doubt through him. The letter turned out to be a life insurance certificate issued for his 15-year-old son, Park Soman, with coverage lasting through the whole year. What stunned him most was the amount. If Park Soman died in an accident, the policy would pay out $1,001,000. Overwhelmed by disbelief and fury, Park approached his wife and showed her the certificate, demanding an explanation. He raised his voice at her, demanding to know the moment she had signed the paper and questioning if she truly wished harm upon their son. Soman's wife explained that she had acted during the time he was hospitalized, after the doctor had informed her that there was no chance he would get better. She recalled how he had once agreed to the arrangement, but at that time he had dismissed her warnings in anger, unwilling to accept the possibility of his son's death. Park observes that Soman has recovered and now attends school on a regular basis. She also enrolls in additional courses beyond her regular schedule. Park soon uncovers a terrifying fact. The insurance policy's value is identical to the $1 billion forecasted by the bank. His wife dismissed his worries, insisting that what he said made no sense. With frustration evident in his movements, he storms out of the house to head to work. Park falls deeper into denial, desperately searching for any other possible reason to explain what is happening. He holds tightly to the belief that, before the year ends, he will hit the jackpot and take home $1 billion after taxes. He felt convinced that no other reason could possibly exist. Clinging to a small glimmer of hope, he makes his way toward a shop that sells lottery tickets. He finds himself facing the harsh truth that his odds of victory are very low. He recognizes how ridiculous it is to connect his son's existence to something like that. He realized that, despite his efforts to focus on other thoughts, worry and fear for Soman's safety overwhelmed his mind. A while later, while he stood by and waited for his son, Soman's voice reached him from across the way. Soman arrives and expresses regret for his tardiness, explaining that he had been tidying up the classroom. Just then, a truck comes racing into view, moving much faster than expected. Park shouted out his son's name in desperation. A truck collides with him as he stands on the road. Driven by an urgent sense of fatherly instinct, he acted out of desperation. At the very last moment, he dashes ahead and shoves his son away from the oncoming truck. He embraced him firmly, his voice filled with concern as he inquired about his well-being. Soman reassured him that he was unharmed and expressed regret for his lack of attention. Park raised his voice at his son, insisting there was no reason to apologize, then looked at him with worried eyes and questioned once more if he was truly unharmed. Assured his father that he felt perfectly fine, prompting his father to embrace him tightly and express deep gratitude that his son was safe. As a crowd began to form around the scene, one of the onlookers suggested contacting the police to report what had happened. Later, he returned to his home. Park gripped the insurance policy tightly, a wave of realization washing over him as the terrifying truth became unmistakably clear. No matter if the cause was a traffic collision or an unusual illness, the arrival of the 1,001,001 this year carried just one meaning for him. It signaled that his son Soman faced a serious threat to his life. Overwhelmed by a mix of rage and hopelessness, he ripped the documents apart. He lost his sanity, tormented by the realization that he had considered exchanging his own son's life for financial gain. He used that ill-fated money to purchase a new car and a house, sharing the celebration with his family. Desperation sparked a memory in his mind, leading him to think of Apollo Savings Bank. He comes to understand that discovering the identity of the person who made the deposit would reveal the future source of such funds. He attempts to contact the bank, only to be met with a recorded notice informing him that the number is no longer in service. He lets out a loud, frustrated yell when he realizes there's no way forward. He recalls the moment when the staff member explained that sharing any information was not allowed due to company policy. Driven by a strong desire to discover what really happened, he makes up his mind to go back to the main office of the bank. She was summoned to speak with the senior officials. He believes that mentioning his son's illness could make them pay attention to his words. He needed to make certain, despite the fact that this money came from his son's life insurance. He ascends the staircase and pushes the door open. The character soon encountered an unexpected and overwhelming surprise. The bank was gone without a trace, and all that remained was a vacant room. He arrives back at his house and shares the news with his wife. The bank had disappeared completely, leaving no evidence behind. Despair washes over him as he comes to the conclusion that he needs to track down the enigmatic old man who seemed to possess all the answers. Regret fills him for not having asked for the man's contact information when he had the chance. He collapsed in tears before his wife, his voice rising in anguish as he declared that their son Soman was going to die. The man's wife struck him across the face. She yells at him, urging him to pull himself together. She reminded him that during moments like this, he needed to be the one who stayed strong. He held the position of authority within the family. Park steadied his gaze as the weight of his responsibilities became clear to him. In a different moment, a visitor arrives, prompting the man to inquire whether the guest is married too. Park assured the man that he was indeed married too. The man, who seemed to be in charge, questioned whether the insurance woman was the person who had handed him her business card. Once Park gives confirmation of this, the boss appeared intrigued, noting how the man's wife seemed quiet and reserved, yet boldly sent her husband to speak with him. The boss inquired whether Park was aware of his current location. He nods in agreement, then, overwhelmed by hopelessness, reveals that the amount he requires is 1,000,000,001 won. The boss let out a dismissive scoff, clearly doubting him, and questioned whether he truly believed he could pay back such a large sum. Park assures the man that he intends to repay the money little by little each month. The boss let out an even louder scoff, and questioned whether anyone could truly handle 1,000,000,000 won every month without difficulty. A brief pause settled over the scene. The boss decides to approve his request for the loan. He cautions him, making it clear that he understands what is involved. Park acknowledges his preparedness to face whatever repercussions may come his way. The boss presented him with a contract valued at $1 billion. She cautions him that the interest will be difficult to manage, yet Park assures her that he is determined to repay the debt, regardless of the challenges he may face. Park ended up owing a loan shark a staggering sum of $1 billion. He was left with no option but to shoulder a monthly interest payment of 25 million won. He had selected something far more valuable than wealth. Park recalled the moment his wife insisted that he exhaust every option to locate the old man, forbidding him from returning home until the search was successful. He wanders through the city, looking everywhere for the person he seeks. After a long search, she eventually spots him relaxing in a public park, surrounded by several other men. Park moved toward him with silent footsteps, catching him off guard. The elderly man notices Park and immediately realizes who he is. With a firm tone, Park insists that they have an important conversation. Once Park finished explaining the circumstances, the old man responded with a calm indifference, acknowledging the situation without emotion. Park, infuriated by this lack of concern, lost his temper, seized the old man, and shouted desperately that his child was in mortal danger because of him. The elderly man advised him to relax, pointing out that Park was fortunate to have been found by him. Park's frustration grew stronger as he recounted the significant difficulties he had faced while searching for him. The elderly man gave a gentle smile and remarked that the boy was forever in a rush. At that moment, a vital secret is uncovered. If the borrowed money is returned ahead of schedule within the looming future event will vanish. Park reacts with disbelief, questioning whether the event would truly be erased. The elderly man reprimanded him, pointing out that he had failed to pay close attention to the terms and conditions. He clarified that returning the borrowed sum to the loan account would alter what lies ahead. The elderly man went on to explain that once the borrowed money was returned to the Apollo Bank account, the bank would instantly recognize it as payment for the loan. According to the bank's policy, any client who chooses to repay early will lose their access to future assets. Once the fee for seeing the future has been settled, the agreement immediately concludes. Park wonders aloud if the promised 1 billion won he was expecting will now be lost as well. The elderly man assures them that the sum will disappear completely, leaving no trace behind. The elderly man explained that the true issue was the client's lack of understanding about the origin of the future money, mentioning that it might come from either an honest or a questionable source. When the funds came from a trustworthy place, Paying them back ahead of schedule resulted in a disadvantage. However, if the origin of the money was questionable, settling the debt sooner was wiser, as it helped to wipe away any negative associations. The elderly man relates this concept to Park's predicament, explaining that if Park pays back the $1 billion immediately, his son's life will be spared, since the money appears to be tied to his son's fate. He explains that this is the reason for his good fortune, and makes it clear that the choice is now his to make. At home, his wife spoke to him with determination, questioning whether any alternatives existed. She explained that the only option left was for him to gather $1 billion and transfer it into the account before the year ended. If he succeeded, all the problems would vanish. The discussion centered around the sum they were meant to get, Soman's sickness, his passing, and the payout from his insurance. Park held on to a final shred of hope, questioning whether the money might have come from someone other than their child. His wife questions him in a pointed manner, wanting to know the reason behind his concern. Park silently acknowledges the truth in her words, recognizing that his unease stems from a strong belief that the money is somehow connected to the circumstances surrounding his son's death. Park's wife insisted that the money must have come from an unsavory source, and she reasoned that if it had ended up with them, it was probably Soman's insurance payout. She explained to him that this was the place where she had lost him before, and requested that he accompany her there. His wife hands him a business card advertising a place disguised as a car wash, which, in reality, operates as a loan office. Park wondered aloud whether she was suggesting that he should obtain money from that place. Park paused, uncertain, as the steep interest rate on the loan gave him reason to reconsider. His wife reprimanded him, questioning whether, given the seriousness of their predicament, it was truly the interest that troubled him most. The story shifts back to the present, where Park reflects on his wife's words and realizes she had been correct. Even though he would be crushed by the overwhelming debt, he found comfort in knowing his child would survive. He decided to prioritize a sense of security, instead of allowing himself to be consumed by anxiety. Park arrived back at his house carrying the money, where his wife questioned whether he had obtained it through a loan. Park wordlessly passed the loan approval contract to her. He discovers her and the children standing beside their suitcases, clearly ready to leave, and the sight catches him off guard. He inquired about her destination, and she responded that she was on her way too. He wonders about her reason for visiting her father's house. She responds by asking another question, clearly taken aback that he is unaware of his mother-in-law's birthday. As gently pushed the door open, she prepared to escort the children outside with her. She instructs the children to go and greet their grandfather. Soman, her son, then inquires about his father. She responds by assuring them that he plans to join their group on the next occasion. Sun Min, the youngest daughter, began to cry, unwilling to leave without him and longing to play together. Park gently reassures her, making a vow to travel by train and meet them the following day, so they can all enjoy the seaside and have fun playing with a ball as a group. The young girl takes a deep breath, her nerves settling, and she nods her agreement. Park looked toward his eldest son, Soman, reminding him of the importance of acting responsibly. He urged Soman to remember his medication each day and to watch over his younger sister with care. After bidding farewell to his children, he turned away. As his wife prepares to depart, she informs him that the funds are expected to come in before the week ends. Park tried to calm his wife's concerns, insisting that there was nothing for her to fear. He explained that the money would be delivered within the week, and promised he would repay it right away as soon as it arrived. His wife insisted that he settle the debt right away, and then contact her to confirm it was done. Park reached out to her but paused, unsure of what to say, and remained silent. As she walked away, she softly assured him that she would return later. In the quiet emptiness of his apartment, Park pondered what lay ahead for him. He realized that just a single day was left. He planned to borrow $1.1 billion, believing it was the only way to rescue his son. However, he knew this huge sum would become a crushing burden of debt. In his mind, he works out that, despite selling both the house lease and the car, he would remain burdened with a debt of around 400 million won. Even so, he makes up his mind to shield his loved ones at any price, convinced that any debt he owes is insignificant when it comes to preserving his son's life. He waits, nerves on edge, as the minutes crawl by and time seems to stretch endlessly. He recalled how the loan shark had assured him that the funds would be in his account by 5 o'clock. Time slips by, and soon the clock moves past 5. He only gets a bothersome text message instead of what he expected. Frustrated, he yells, questioning why the promised money still hasn't shown up. He questioned whether he had placed his trust in the loan shark without enough caution. At that instant, his phone began to ring. He is suddenly assaulted from the rear, a pair of hands tightening mercilessly around his throat. He struggled to breathe, fighting desperately against the force constricting him. He questions in his mind the reason behind the loan shark's aggression toward him. With every ounce of energy he possesses, he struggles desperately to survive. He felt a deep ache at the idea that his life might end in such a ridiculous manner. He felt anxious about what might become of his family once he was gone. As his life slipped away, he remembered the things he had once said to his wife. Their disagreement about the insurance policy continued. At that moment, he finally understands the terrible reality. The $1 billion he expected to receive by year's end was not compensation for his son's life, but rather the value placed on his own. In his last moment of awareness, Park recalls the warning the elderly man once shared with him about Apollo Bank's strict regulations. When the loan is paid off ahead of schedule, the agreement concludes and the upcoming event is canceled. He comes to the startling conclusion that the billion-dollar insurance payout would only be given in the event of his own demise. Soman's life would be spared, and his untimely death would never occur. Relief and pain surged through him at once, and with a gentle smile he spoke his son's name for the final time. Without warning, Park opens his eyes and comes to consciousness. She drew in a sharp breath, fear written across her face. Blood stained his hands, and as he glanced to his side, he discovered the loan shark lying lifeless, a knife embedded in the man's chest and blood soaking his body. Still reeling from surprise, he tries to piece together the events that just unfolded. He came to the unsettling realization that a person had lost their life inside his house. His phone began to ring, displaying Soman's mother as the caller. He responds frantically, struggling to explain the situation to her. He recognized the voice that answered the call, one he had heard many times before. Surprise filled him as he wondered aloud if Soman's life was truly in danger. The news report, either heard over the phone or recalled as a memory, delivered a startling revelation. Soman had lost his life after choking on a rice cake that his grandmother had given him. The setting transitions to Soman's funeral, with Park frozen in disbelief as he faces the memorial set up for his son. Park reached into his pocket and pulled out an emblem marked with dried blood. He gazed at it, his face clouded with confusion, unable to grasp the hidden meaning it held. Overcome with sorrow, sinks to the floor as her emotions overwhelm her. Park moved closer to his wife, offering comfort by softly resting his hand on her shoulder. Despite her sorrow, her family gathers closely around her, offering comfort and reassurance. The others requested that Park remain behind as they tended to her, leaving him isolated in his sorrow. Park stooped to retrieve his wife's phone from the floor. As he looked at the screen, his eyes locked onto a cheerful family photograph, and a sharp ache filled his chest. Park lowered himself onto the seat, unable to hold back the flood of sharp, sorrowful tears. The quiet atmosphere of the wake was broken by the sound of Park's uncontrollable crying. While tears streamed down his face, he caught sight of a notification lighting up on his wife's phone, which rested in his grasp. The notification discloses that has more than one profile. His curiosity compels him to unlock the phone. Without warning, Park stops moving, his expression frozen in disbelief as he scans through his wife's messages on her phone, the astonishment unmistakably etched across his features. He realizes that one of the people in the chat is using Ho's photo, the lone shark, as their profile picture. He grows increasingly stunned while reading through the messages exchanged between his wife and. The exchanged messages exposed their plan to murder him. These communications showed that they had decided to stay committed to their scheme, and they also made it clear that was reaching out to Ho to inform him that her husband was at home, making it possible for Ho to arrive and carry out the killing. Park's mind revisits the exchanges between his wife and the lone shark, Ho, recalling how assured Ho that they would stand firm in their decision. Responded by saying he would collect the 1 billion won from her husband's insurance, and she quickly consented, urging him to act fast. Park remains frozen in disbelief, struggling to process the full weight of the scene before him. The story moves back to a previous moment, showing resting in bed beside as she pleaded with him to end her husband's life. Hesitated, feeling that the request was excessive. Meeting in secret was all it took. Starts to share her tale. She insisted that her husband had received mysterious funds that seemed to come from the future. The money appeared to be connected to the tragic loss of their son, Soman. She requests that he use his own money to settle the troublesome debt without delay. Firmly refuses to let himself be used as a source of money for her. Despite his hesitation, she remains adamant and finally unveils her real intentions. She had taken out a life insurance policy on her husband worth $1 billion. She explained to him that she had gone through the unusual bank's conditions and discovered that paying off the loan ahead of schedule would prevent the event from happening. She requested his help, hoping he would provide the money she needed to settle her debt with the bank. Their plan was to end her husband's life and collect the insurance payout for themselves. Gazes at him with a composed expression, wondering aloud whether he is truly willing to offer her the money. Dismissed the idea with a scoff, thinking it was completely irrational, and questioned to himself the reason for putting everything on the line. Presented her last proposal to him, promising eternal devotion. Responded with the belief that, regardless of the situation, he would ultimately come out on the losing side. Clearly stung by his harsh words, pushed back with defiance. She insisted that he was free to sleep next to her at any time, making it clear that he couldn't avoid her presence no matter what he tried. She kept urging him, assuring that he wouldn't have to worry about troublesome debts or being burdened with an unhelpful spouse. She mentioned that the moment had come to make a change. The story shifts back to the current moment, where Soman's funeral is taking place. Park walked into the room and requested that his family move aside for a short while. He signaled that he wanted to discuss something with. Park stood rigid and unsmiling in front of, whose eyes widened with fear as she met his gaze. At that instant, he dropped her phone next to her, revealing her chat with Ho on the screen. Having pieced everything together from the messages he had read, realized that he was now aware of the truth. She struggled to offer an explanation for what had happened, but no words came to defend what she had done. Park's temper erupted, and he lunged at, his hands closing around her throat. As he choked her, he shouted furiously at his wife, hurling accusations that she had teamed up with that villain in a plot to end his life. Park kept his grip tight around his neck, his actions growing more aggressive and forceful. His words echoed through the room, heavy and forceful, as he shouted the word, "Die," again and again. Hatred burned in his eyes while he blamed her for their son's tragic death, his accusations sharp and unforgiving. Fought with all her remaining strength, her breaths coming in ragged gasps as she pleaded for mercy. Without warning, a group of men stormed into the room, abruptly halting what was happening. Park came to a sudden halt, his face reflecting uncertainty as he glanced at the group, puzzled by their unfamiliar presence. One of the men introduced himself as an officer from the police station and presented his official identification card from the National Police Agency. Using a serious and official voice, the officer Park Ho that he was being taken into custody immediately, suspected of having killed a man by the name of Ho. Park's expression transformed into one of utter shock and terror, his eyes growing wide. His wife mirrored his reaction, staring at the unfolding scene with eyes that seemed ready to pop from her head. Park quietly questioned the situation, unable to believe that he might actually be considered a murder suspect. The officer informs him that a witness has come forward with a report and requests his assistance in the ongoing investigation. Park remained silent, unable to find any words. Surrounded by a sea of white wreaths in the funeral hall, the officer started to recite the man's legal rights. The officer explained that the man was entitled to a lawyer and would have a chance to share his own version of events. He was granted the opportunity to have a judge examine the decision to keep him in custody. Meanwhile, a different officer approached and secured his wrists with handcuffs. While being escorted away, Park drifts into his own mind, firmly assuring himself that he was not responsible for Ho's death. His thoughts drift back to that fateful day, filling him with intense remorse and a desperate longing that he had been the one to perish in So-man's place. Suddenly, a vivid vision from the crime scene unfolded before his eyes. Ho's lifeless form lay sprawled on the ground, with a metal emblem smeared in blood resting nearby. A sudden understanding flashed across his face, his eyes growing wide as the memory of that emblem resurfaced clearly in his mind. The emblem matched the one displayed on Sang Sang's bank employee badge. Compelled by the startling revelation, Park resolves to take a risky course of action. He suddenly rushed at a steaming pot of soup, moving with urgency. He hurled it at the officers, causing them to cry out in agony as it struck their faces. Seizing the opportunity presented by the confusion, he slips away unnoticed. The officers shouted from behind, urgently commanding those nearby to seize him. A month passed since the tragedy, with Park consumed by sorrow and anger over So-man's death, before the focus moved to a different place. An elderly client took a seat across from bank employee Sang Sang. The man inquired about the status of his paperwork, and Sang Sang confirmed that everything was prepared. The elderly man reacts with amazement to the possibility of getting money ahead of time from the future, finding the notion almost impossible to believe. Still in awe, he wonders aloud when he will find out the outcome. The employee stated that he needed to go back to his office in order to input the documents and complete the required calculations. He assured that he would be able to get in touch with him the following day. The elderly man requested that the employee look after the matter, and the employee offered a comforting response, letting the man know that he needed to meet with another client at that moment. After handing his business card to the elderly man, Sang Sang turned and walked away. The character exits into a street where the rain pours down relentlessly. While he strolled beneath his umbrella, a figure cloaked in a hood abruptly lunged at him and seized his collar with a forceful grip. Sang Sang, gripped by fear, desperately demands to know the reason behind his assailant's actions. The attacker pulls back his hood, exposing his identity to everyone present. It turned out to be Park Ho, who lifted the Apollo Bank emblem stained with blood and with a mocking tone questioned whether he remembered it. The story shifts to an earlier time, showing a different man with glasses looking uneasy as he makes his way through a dimly lit alley. They continued their search but found nothing, their efforts proving fruitless. The setting changes to the intense confrontation between Park and Ho. After Park collapses, Sang Sang and a colleague arrive on the scene. In a sudden move, the colleague drives a knife into Ho. Struggled to fight back against their attempts to overpower him. His energy drained rapidly, and in a desperate effort to defend himself, he tore the metal emblem from his suit. Collapsed onto the floor. Once they were confident their target had been dealt with, Sung Sung instructed his bespectacled companion to retreat, and together they departed from the area. Park remained beside's lifeless form. He spots an object beside's hand, surrounded by a puddle of blood. The item turns out to be the badge from Apollo Bank. The man suddenly understood that he had made a serious error by leaving behind such an obvious clue. Terror grips him, and he whirls around, sensing an ominous presence close behind. The man, breathless and frightened, hurries back toward the building. Without hesitation, the character hurried up the staircase, making their way to apartment 403. Once inside the apartment, after confirming that he was alone, he let out a relieved sigh. He pulls out his phone and attempts to dial a contact labeled as Assistant Sang Sang. The phone call failed to connect, sending the call directly to voicemail, which caused the man to swear in frustration. The man notices footsteps echoing through the hallway of the building. She peers through the peephole, her face tense with worry. He looks around, but the area outside appears empty. Without warning, His phone began to ring, startling him so much that he leapt in surprise. Team leader Park Mong is the person making the call. The man picked up his phone, only to hear his team leader's sharp reprimand for not responding sooner and for moving about with his location tracker switched off, a clear violation of RO organization protocol. With a shaky voice, the man explained that he had just gotten home. With fear trembling in his voice, he informed his leader that the ghost had shown itself. The leader stared in disbelief at the apparition before them, questioning whether it was truly a ghost. He peered through the peephole once more, fear gripping him as he strained to hear what was happening outside. At that moment, the ghost revealed himself, a strange elderly man clutching the golden Apollo Bank emblem, his unsettling smile stretching across his face as he proclaimed that he had won. On the opposite end of the call, Wu, a bespectacled man, whispered the word maestro, his voice trembling with fear. The team leader raises their voice, speaking loudly into the phone. Just then, an object shot through the peephole and struck Wu in the head. Wu's lifeless body rests on the ground, his eyes frozen wide with a look of everlasting surprise. The leader voiced the boy's name, firmly insisting that he respond. At the same time, the enigmatic elderly maestro quietly exited the building, softly humming a melody to himself. He released a soft, menacing chuckle. In another location, Park persisted in challenging the bank worker, Sang, blaming him and his associates for the murder of the lone shark. Sang, maintaining a calm demeanor, requests that Park release him. However, Park refuses and demands an explanation about the bank's ability to foresee individuals' futures. Sang explained that the unique arrangement was a special feature offered by Apollo Savings Bank. Park's temper ignited as he accused Sang of having knowledge about his son's impending death. In response, Sang attempted to mask any prior knowledge by acting shocked and saddened when the news of the son's passing was mentioned. Park remained unconvinced by the old man's words and decided to explain his own suspicions. In his view, the old man had deliberately drawn him to the bank, where a plot unfolded that resulted in the bank causing his son's death, all for the purpose of claiming the life insurance payout. He claimed they had interfered with the destiny of his family. When the old man comes up in conversation, Sang's face shifts noticeably. Without warning, he seizes Park's wrist, his grip unexpectedly strong. Park let out a sharp cry as pain surged through him. Sang looked at Park with a serious expression, wanting to know how he had discovered the bank. Struggling through his discomfort, Park explained that an elderly passenger had entered his taxi and revealed the location to him. Sang continued her questioning, wanting to know whether the elderly man had been holding a cane that featured any inscriptions. Park recalls seeing the elderly man holding his cane while sitting in his car. Sung understood how serious things had become and expressed to Park that it would have been better if Park had brought him sooner. Before Park has a chance to grasp Sung's intentions, Sung suddenly launches an attack against him. With a sudden burst of strength, she hurled him down onto the ground with great force. Sang pressed a chemical-soaked cloth against Park's face, causing Park to swiftly slip into unconsciousness. As this happened, Sang calmly assured Park that he would regain consciousness soon. Despite putting forth all his strength to fight back, Park finds himself unable to overcome the force against him. Without warning, a truck comes into view, racing straight in their direction. The truck collided forcefully, scattering debris everywhere and leaving chaos in its wake. A thick cloud of dust and scattered debris lingered in the air after the impact. Park's awareness gradually returned as he began to wake up. The character remains motionless, lost in a trance-like state. He discovered Sang's lifeless body lying among the ruins. Park walked up to him, while he shifted uneasily, uncertain about the proper way to behave in that moment. Amid the debris left by the crash, Park stared in disbelief as the truck driver stepped into view before him. The driver walked purposefully in the direction of the briefcase that Sang held. Afterward, the character retrieves the item and begins walking toward the park, carrying it along. Blood streamed down the driver's face as he issued a grave warning to Park, cautioning that the Arrow organization intended to use manipulation to bend Park to their ambitions. Park let out a desperate, frightened cry, overwhelmed by fear and uncertainty. The driver handed the briefcase over to Park, then shared one last surprising message. He explained that if Park ever encountered leader Park Mong, it would involve his son, So Min. There is still hope for salvation. The driver suddenly collapses onto the ground, lifeless. Unable to believe the words reaching his ears, he hesitantly questions whether rescuing Soman could truly be within their grasp. The setting moves to Woo's apartment. Inside, Leader Park closely studies a photograph from a crime scene. In the image, Woo's lifeless body is visible, someone the group recognizes as. Beside his body, the word Maestro appears, scrawled in his own blood across the floor as his last message. The leader realizes that managed to send them a message before his death. He notes that although the Maestro died years ago, he has somehow returned. During this period in history, he acknowledges that their goal is to bring the event to a close during this time period. Had been given the task of keeping an eye on Park Ho, but now someone else needed to take over his duties. As he looked through his bag, he inspected its contents carefully. He mentions that communication with Sang Sang has also been severed. The leader harbors suspicions that the Maestro played a role in Sang Sang's vanishing. After considering the situation, the character realizes they will need to overhaul their entire strategy. He grabs identification card and rips it apart, leaving no trace of it behind. It was announced that its access card would be destroyed, an act that would erase all memories of the future. At the same time, Park struggled to catch his breath as he stood in the street. Still holding on to the slim promise offered by the driver's final words, the belief that Soman might be rescued kept her going. He notices police cars drawing closer. He darts into a nearby alley, seeking cover as fast as he can. Clutching the briefcase that had been given to him. Once the threat was gone, Park slipped into his secret hideout, breathless and shaken, struggling to make sense of the recent events. Inside the shadowy hideout, Park's thoughts are invaded by haunting memories. Visions of joyful days with his family, the sting of his wife's betrayal, and moments of deep anguish race through his mind. Just as hopelessness overwhelms him, his strength gives out and he sinks to the ground. He steadied himself, drawing on his inner resolve as his eyes locked onto the briefcase that had been set aside for him. Park discovered an iron bar nearby and opened the briefcase with it. Park's eyes widen in shock as he discovers something unexpected within. He comes across an advanced computer along with an identification card belonging to Sang Sang, though the card displays the name as above's actual name. Park found the peculiar name confusing and questioned internally whether Sang Sang might be from another country. He rummaged through the briefcase and came across a loan agreement bearing another person's name. What caught his attention even more was the signature of the loan officer, Park Mong. He discovers a business card that reveals his position as a branch manager. At that moment, Park recalls the driver's advice. Meeting this man holds the answer to saving his son Soman. A spark of hope flickers inside him once more. With the details he uncovered, Sang Sang's phone rang, displaying Park Mong as the caller. Park's response comes next. Park Mong wanted to know more about Sang Sang, so he questioned the other person about him. Responded by inquiring about the identity of the person on the other end of the line. In a straightforward manner, Park informed him that Sung Sung had passed away. Taken aback, questioned the caller once more about his identity, but Park only responded that he would disclose who he was if agreed to a meeting. His eyes light up with anticipation as he inquires about the whereabouts of the briefcase, prompting Park to suddenly grasp how significant the item truly is. Mong cautioned him against interfering, making it clear that such things were beyond the abilities of someone like him. Park's emotions overwhelm him, and he collapses in utter despair. He made it clear that the briefcase and whatever was inside meant nothing to him. His only concern was rescuing his son. He begs for help, explaining that someone had told him Mong was the only one who could rescue him. When he hears the mention of a son, it dawns on him that the person on the other end of the line is Park. Abruptly, he announces that he needs to return the call later and quickly hangs up. Park was left in tears, overwhelmed by frustration. Seated in his car, reflected on the catastrophe they faced, mourning the loss of 2 agents in a single day. This incident became known as the most disastrous in history. He holds the maestro responsible for the current situation, still shocked that the person he believed gone has come back. Realizing there are no other options, he prepares to call the group together. He dialed a number and informed the person on the other end that he had decided to go with the option he considered less harmful. The story abruptly shifts to April 14, 1865, placing the setting inside Ford's Theater. Abraham Lincoln, who was the 16th President of the United States, sat in the theater as a play unfolded before him. A figure suddenly emerged behind him, pressing the cold barrel of a pistol against his head. In a different room, an individual observed the unfolding events, their gaze filled with eager expectation. A man with hair, known as Psyche, stood beside an enigmatic woman as they observed the events unfolding before them. Without warning, the woman quietly mouthed the word "bang," her voice carrying the anticipation of a gunshot about to break the silence.